Songwriter. He is the God who wrote the Psalms, after all, and the Psalms are 150 songs that God wrote for Israel, had Israelis write. But there's another verse, don't turn to it, I just want to read it to you. God is not only a songwriter, God is a singer. In Zephaniah chapter 3, verse 17, it says, "The Lord your God in your midst, the mighty one, will save. He will rejoice over you with gladness. He will quiet you with His love. He will rejoice over you with singing." Zephaniah chapter 3, verse 17. We're going to be in Deuteronomy chapter 32 this morning. Last week in Deuteronomy chapter 31, we saw a new leader for Israel, Joshua. Joshua was commissioned by Yahweh Himself to lead Israel across the Jordan River and into the Promised Land. We also heard Moses' charge to Joshua, and this was the charge in Deuteronomy chapter 31, verse 6, not only to Joshua, but to all of Israel. This is what Moses said: "Be strong and courageous, do not be afraid or tremble at them." The them is the people that they would meet in the Promised Land. Their enemies, God's enemies. Don't be afraid of them. Don't tremble at them, but be strong and courageous for the Lord your God. Why is it that people could be strong and courageous? Why is it that Israel didn't have to fear when they saw strong cities and stronger armies than they were? Because God is the one who goes with you, and He will not fail you or forsake you. So Israel is being told, if you'll keep your focus on Yahweh, not on the circumstances. He wasn't doing that with me. I just want y'all to remember that. Oh, that's yours. That's interesting. A mother knows her baby's cry. You knew that wasn't him. Interesting. Keep your focus on Yahweh was the point here, not on the circumstances. There are circumstances in life, and certainly Israel would face circumstances when their foes, their enemies, appeared to be too strong to overtake. And we have times in our life when what's against us seems like it's too big to get around. But God says, keep your focus on me. Keep your focus on my abilities, not on your abilities. And that's what the focus in Deuteronomy 31:6 is. You can be strong and courageous, Israel, and you can be strong and courageous, Joshua, no matter who you face, because it's Yahweh, the one true God, who is with you and goes on before you. I want to say one word about Joshua's commissioning that I didn't say last time. The word commission, remember Moses is told by God, bring Joshua, I want to commission him. And this is what that word commission is. It's just an interesting order of authority and mission that the Bible lays out in this commissioning of Joshua. Just want to spend a minute talking about this. It's the word tsiva, T-S-I-V-A. It's hard to see there, but it's T-S-I-V-A, tsiva, and it means to give an order. It means to give an order or to appoint or assign to a task. What God is doing when He commissions Joshua is not giving Joshua a leadership, authority position, role. What God is doing when He calls Joshua is giving him a mission. He's giving him orders. Joshua was commissioned to do a task, and this was the task. The reason I'm saying this is a lot of times, especially today, we elect people to public office. We give them a lot of authority, but the mission isn't well defined. What we expect from them isn't well defined. In the Bible, it's the opposite. In the Bible, there's a mission that needs to take place, and God chooses a man who can do that mission for Him. The authority comes because of the gravity, the importance of the mission. I wish we could elect people like that based on the fact that we need America to turn back to God. I wish we could find a godly man to elect for the mission of turning America back to God, but instead we elect politicians and we send them up there, we give them great authority, but their mission isn't determined. It's the opposite in the Scripture. Joshua was commissioned by God for a task, for a mission. He was sent on a mission, and this was the rule. This was the game that God called Joshua to play. Number one, he was to lead Israel, the nation Israel, across the River Jordan into the Promised Land. That's the first part of his task. His commissioning, his mission was to lead Israel because Moses would die. I need you to take Israel into the Promised Land. I have decided as God that you're the man for the job. The second part of his mission was to defeat Yahweh's enemies in the land. God called out a military man. Joshua was a conqueror. Joshua was a man of strength. He was a man trained in military battle. And his mission was not only to lead Israel, but when you meet the enemies in the land, defeat them entirely. Remember, in the last couple of weeks, I've shown you the verse that says, leave nothing alive that breathes. In the land of Canaan, kill everything. I have given them 400 years. He promised this to Abraham, that he would give the Amorites, the people of the land of Canaan, 400 years to turn to him, and they didn't. They were idolaters, they were pagans, they were worshiping false gods. So Yahweh, the one true God, decided it's time for them all to be destroyed. Who's going to do it? Joshua. Joshua is going to lead the conquesting army. And the other thing Joshua was commissioned for was after you take control of the land and kill the enemies of God in the land, apportion the land to the tribes of Israel. That was also part of Joshua's mission. They would draw a lot, and by that lot, the tribes of Judah got this land, from this river to this mountain range to this stream, etc. Then the land of Naphtali was chosen. Then the land of all these different lands of Asher, Gad, Dan, all the other sons of Israel were apportioned. That was another part of Joshua's commissioning. So Joshua wasn't just given authority. This is the point I'm trying to make. He simply wasn't given a title. And now you get to choose how you rule the people. That's not how authority works in the Bible. It's not how it worked with Paul. It's not how it worked with Barnabas. Even in the New Testament in the church, they were sent on a mission. The mission to build churches in the name of Jesus Christ. And then God selected the men for the job. The mission for Joshua was, as it states on the board, he wasn't just given authority as the leader of Israel. He was presented with a mission to achieve. His authority then, good morning, his authority came because of the gravity of the mission, because of the importance of the mission that Yahweh set before Joshua. That's why Joshua was the leader of Israel. It was because he had a job to do. So this is how I can hear God making statement to Joshua. You have a job to do, Joshua, so lead. Lead as a leader of men because I have commissioned you for a job to do. So his authority came not because God set him up as the leader of Israel. His authority was because of the mission that he had to do, and he had to take authority over Israel in order to lead them and defeat their enemies and dish out the land as God saw fit. We have this all backwards in the world. We have this all backwards. We elect people who are pretty and big and handsome and strong, or that have a silver tongue. And our focus isn't on the mission at hand when we send a representative to the State House in Austin or a senator to the halls of Washington, D.C.'s Senate building. We don't have the mission in mind. We just elect leaders. We've got it backwards. We need to find people who will lead America back to God, a relationship with the one true God, and elect that guy. Give him authority to fulfill his mission. That's the pattern. That's the biblical pattern. I give you an important job to do. You'll have authority because of the importance of the job before you. Then in verse 16, enough of that. I hope you understand my point there. In verse 16, Yahweh tells Moses that Israel will turn to false gods. Look what it said in 31:16. The Lord said to Moses, 31:16, behold, you're about to lie down with your fathers. That means I'm about to take your life. You're about to die, Moses. And this people, Israel, your brothers and sisters, this people, Israel, will arise and play the harlot with strange gods of the land. Exactly what I asked them not to do. What I commanded them not to do is exactly what they will do. In the midst of which they're going, the land of Canaan, these people will forsake me, Moses, and they'll break my covenant which I've made with them. And when they go first and they walk away from me and start worshiping false gods, not the true God, but false gods, in verse 17, then my anger will be kindled against them in that day. God's going to respond. And I'll forsake them and hide my face from them. He'll take His presence away from them, and they will be consumed. God will cause their being consumed and destroyed. He says, many evils and troubles will come upon them. That's what He talked about in Deuteronomy chapter 28. If you disobey me, if you turn to other gods, I promise you these cursings will come. So He says, when they leave me and disobey and start worshiping false gods, many evils and troubles will come upon them, just like I said they would. So that they will say in that day, is it not because our God is not among us that these evils have come upon us? The answer is yes. It's because your God is not among you. You kicked Him out. You chose for God to leave. Verse 18, He says, but I will surely hide my face in that day because of all the evil which they will do, for they will turn to other gods. And then Yahweh tells Moses, and this is why I'm going through this again, because Yahweh tells Moses at this point in chapter 31, write a song. The power of music. I think it was an Irish philosopher. I forget the man's name, but I've heard this. It was an Irish philosopher not 50 or 60 years ago that said, I don't care who writes the laws of your land. Of no interest to me. Let me write their music. If you want to have influence among a people, doesn't matter what the laws are. How many laws in America are passed day after day after day? The lawmaker tries to get control of the people. But who really has control? The artist, Hollywood, music, the influencers of our day. They're not the lawmakers. They're the ones that write the music. They're the ones that paint the paintings. They're the ones that make the movies. So even in the days when movies were just coming, this Irishman said, I'm not interested in writing the laws. Don't set me up in the parliament to write the laws of the land. I'll have no influence. Let me write their songs. Let me be their artist. And that's exactly what goes on here. God knows music. Music will be influential. They'll remember this song. I'll burrow it into their minds and they'll remember it. So he says, therefore, in verse 19, write this song for Israel and teach it to the sons of Israel. Put it on their lips so that this song may be a witness for me against the sons of Israel. When they turn to other gods, and he has just told Moses that they will leave me. Despite everything that I am, they will choose to leave the worship of me, and they'll worship things that aren't gods. And when they do, I want them to remember this song. Interesting, isn't it? A song. Then it shall come about when many evils and troubles have come upon them, that this song will testify before them as a witness. For this song shall not be forgotten from the lips of their descendants. I wonder how many of how many Jews today are familiar with the Song of Moses. Somebody needs to put it to music and put it on Jewish radio. For I know the intent which they are developing today, before even I have brought them into the land which I swore. Even before they go into the land and are tempted by the pagan gods of Canaan, even before that, they're already working up idolatry in their minds. So we're going to write a song. Verse 22 says, so Moses wrote this song the same day and taught it to the sons of Israel. The Song of Moses. In chapter 32, we read about the Song of Moses. If God wrote a song, what would the lyrics be? What would the stanzas be? What would the chorus be? That recurring chorus. You know, you sing a verse of a song and then you sing the chorus. Then you sing another verse and then you sing the exact same chorus. Then you sing another verse and you sing the exact same chorus. What's exact about the song and what changes? Let's look at it. This is a song that Israel was taught by Moses. God's words. Give ear, O heavens, and let me speak, and let the earth hear the words of my mouth. The first words of the song. Let my teaching drop as the rain, my speech distill as the dew, as the droplets on the fresh grass and the showers on the herb. Very poetic, but what does it mean? Listen to my words and obey them, and let my words bear fruit. Just like rain drops on fresh grass and the grass grows, let the words of my mouth, let the truth that I speak make you prosperous and fruitful in the land. For I proclaim the name of the Lord. Here we go with the chorus, I believe, not the stanza, but the chorus. What's the most important fact of the song? What does God want them to remember more than anything? What he starts with. I proclaim the name of the Lord, Moses says. The name of the Lord, this word means to speak of his character. Not his name, not Yahweh, not Rick. We're talking about the name, his character, his essence. Moses wants to teach Israel who God is. Before we get into the idolatrous part of the song, Moses says you have to understand who the God is that wants to have a relationship with you. So he says, I proclaim the name of the Lord, ascribe greatness to our God. It's a great song so far. Look what he calls the Lord. He says, the rock. His work is perfect, for all his ways are just. A God of faithfulness and without injustice, righteous and upright is he. Why would you ever want to not have a relationship with that character, with that God? So Moses first introduces the party and Yahweh goes first. And he just introduced Yahweh and described him. Moses highlights some of the wonderful characteristics of God. I just want to look at him quickly. What does he say about God? This is Israel's song that they're to remember for all generations. Look at what he says about Yahweh, the one true God. He's a great God. Ascribe greatness to our God. It means he's outstanding in importance. He stands up above everything else that's important. God stands head and shoulders above everything of import. He is of outstanding importance. He's great. That's what the word great means in the Hebrew. He has eminence and he has superiority. Good enough. I want to worship that God. But that's not all he says about him. He calls him the rock. And the fact that Moses calls him the rock, this is the first time God's called the rock in the Bible, but King David loved this term for God. If you look in the Psalms over and over and over, God is my rock, my fortress, my high tower, my banner that goes before me. But it's the rock is always in there in David's mind. I wonder why. Because I know that David knew the Song of Moses when God is introduced as the rock. He's strong. What do we learn about the rock from this word? He's strong, he's stable, he's permanent, he's reliable, he's solidly faithful, he's unchanging, unchangeable even. Not only does he not change, he cannot change. This is the God we should want to worship. This is the God that wants relationship with Israel. His work is perfect, it says. The Hebrew word tamim, it means it's without defect or without blemish. As we'll see in a minute, Israel has a defect. God does not. God's work is perfect. It's without defect. It's without blemish. This is the song. Listen to how it lifts up God. He's just. It says He's just and He's without justice, so He's free from favoritism. Isn't that a wonderful thing? Does the pastor have a favorite in the church? If he did, and it wasn't you, wouldn't it drive you nuts? God is free from favoritism. Thank God for that. There's nobody that stands head and shoulders above you in God's eyes. You're made in the image and likeness of God. He loves you with a purity that can't be described by man. He's free from favoritism. He's free from bias. He's free from deception. And He's free from any self-interest. He doesn't have to have an overzealous self-interest. He's the self-existing God. He knows who He is. That's the God that wants to have relationship not only with Israel, but Christian, with you and me. This is Him. You wonder, where do we get that essence box? Absolute righteousness, sovereignty, eternal life, love, justice, omnipotence, omniscience, omnipresence, veracity, immutability. Where do we get those characteristics of God that we put in that box? Well, from the Bible, from the Psalms, from the Old Testament. That's what God is doing in the book. He's revealing Himself to us. He's showing us and teaching us who He is. And with Israel on this day, through this song, God is again reminding Israel, I'm still the same God. I don't know why you would want to turn away from me, but you will. He's faithful, it says. Emunah is the Hebrew word, emunah, and it means He's trustworthy. He's trustworthy. You can trust what He says. He's a faithful God. If He's made a promise, He'll keep it. He's reliable. He does what He says He will do every time. Now, in humanity, among men, there are some faithful men, but not perfectly faithful. You see, in God, God does what He says He will do every time. There's never, I got hung up with this. I forgot I had an appointment. I forgot we had a party for the kids. I forgot. Every time God says something, God does it. Who doesn't want relationship with this God? Don't you love the Bible, though, and the fact that you bring these things out? It's like, oh, so that's who this God is. That's who He's always been in His perfection. Yeah, all of these things are unchanging. He's righteous. He always does what is morally right. Now, you have to remember all these things because He's about to say the opposite about the people Israel. See, this is who God is, and in a minute He's going to say, but Israel is immoral, not moral, not righteous. They are immoral, without righteousness. And they're not upright, like God is, straight and right and proper, not deviating to the left hand or to the right, but straight and right and proper is God. He's upright. And in just a second, we're going to see that Israel is perverse and crooked. You see the difference between crooked and straight? Very easy to see. They're perverse, they're immoral. And they're crooked, they're not straight. So God, through Moses in writing this song, first highlights who God is. So who is He in one statement? He's a trustworthy, promise-keeping, stable, fair God who guarantees protection and prosperity to Israel if they would only obey Him. And to that I say, good enough, I'll take it. I want to live in that God's presence. How could you ever imagine if you walk away from God and go into idolatry as Israel would, that the presence of that God that's listed there, all those characteristics that Moses brings out about God, that God would leave? Why would you ever want to take a single step in the human life without that God leading the way? But yet Israel will prove that that's exactly what they do. That's exactly what they want. What about Israel's character? Oh, one more statement. This is for Israel, not the church. This is a critical statement. We're in the Old Testament, in the book of Deuteronomy, reading truths about God's relationship and His covenant, His contract, His promises that He made with Israel, with Abraham's children, Isaac's children, Jacob's children. These promises that we read about, and this song is not a song for the United States of America, and it's not a song for the church. This is Jewish. This is about Israel and their relationship with God. We're not in the age of Israel. We're in the age of the church. So what about Israel's character in the second stanza here in verse 5? Remember, this is a song that Israel would sing. I sing a song. When I choose to sing songs, I sing happy songs. Imagine Israel having this in their streams of consciousness. You know, it's that song you hear on the radio on the way to work. You can't get it out of your mind all day. You know that music. It just sticks with you. It just is always there all day. You're humming that song. You're hearing that melody. That's what we have here. That's the song that God's writing for Israel. One that won't be able to leave their lips. They'll always remember this song. And what do they say about themselves? I mean, imagine this, you singing this about yourself and your own family and your cousins and your tribe members. They have acted corruptly toward God. That God, Israel chose to act corruptly against. Me, as a Jew, if I were in Moses' day, would have to sing this song about the greatness of God and then say, but I walked away. How do you sing that verse? They have acted corruptly toward Him. They are not His children because of their defect. Remember the word tamim there? Third one down, His work is perfect, without defect, without blemish. What does He say about Israel? The opposite. They're not worthy of being His children, even though He's called them to be His children, and they still are. They're not worthy. They're not His children because of their defect, but they are a perverse and crooked generation. Look at what it says in Deuteronomy chapter 9, verse 12. Remember, we're in Deuteronomy. This is a series of 4 or 5 sermons that Moses gives the Israelites in the plains of Moab as they're about to cross the river Jordan. That's what the book of Deuteronomy is. And in Deuteronomy chapter 9, verse 12, then the Lord said to me, arise, go down from here quickly. For your people whom you brought out of Egypt have acted corruptly. That's why I came here, because that's what it just says. Israel acted corruptly against their God. What does that mean? What's God in this song referring to? He's referring to a historical event. This is it. They have quickly turned aside from the way which I commanded them, and they have made a molten image for themselves. What is the molten image that they made? The golden calf. Moses is on Mount Sinai in the presence of God. Moses is hearing the commandments. I am the Lord God. You shall have no other gods in my presence before me, in opposition to me. One God. Number 2, you shall make no graven images. Make no idols of me, because you have not seen me. How would you know what to carve if you've never laid eyes on me? And what did they do? They've acted corruptly. They've quickly turned aside from those commands that God gave them. And even before Moses comes down off of Mount Sinai, his dear brother Aaron, the high priest, has already made a golden calf, an idolatrous golden calf. He says another couple of things about them. He says they are perverse and they are crooked. In the song that's going to run through your mind, goodness, ikesh. Ikesh is the Hebrew word for perverse. And it means twisted or false. It also means, many words have many different connotations and definitions. It also means that they are dishonest, they're immoral, and they're evasive. They're perverse. And we'll see this word 3 times in the song. God continues to bring up the perversity, the immorality, the dishonesty of Israel as we go through it. So they're perverse, this generation of Israelites. And they're also this word, petaltal. He translates it, the English translated it as crooked. But it means to be tortuous or perverse. Tortuous means having many twists and turns. It's not a word that means torture. That's not at all what it means. Tortuous means having many twists and turns. A winding road is tortuous. And that's what he calls Israel. They deviate from what is considered moral, right, proper, or good. And what is considered moral, right, proper, or good but Yahweh himself? And the relationship Yahweh wants to have with Israel. But yet Israel deviates. They walk away from that. They don't want to stay straight on the proper path with God. They just are deviating, immoral people that turn away from what's right. That's what he calls them. These 2 words indicate that Israel is the opposite of her father, Yahweh, the Creator. They're opposite God in their character. They should be imitators of God. They should be trying to walk as God has shown himself to be. They should be imitators of God. They should be righteous. They should be upright. But instead, Israel is perverse and Israel is crooked. And these are God's words. Tough. I ask this question, fellow Americans, if God wrote a song for America today, I just wonder what kind of verbiage would be in that song. Not for you as an American, as a Christian, Bible-believing American, but for America as a whole. In verse 6, before we go, it says she has a defect. It's the Hebrew word mum, M-U-M, and it means a mark or a flaw that spoils her appearance. What is Israel's defect? Idolatry. This people can't keep. They could, but they don't. They're totally drawn to idol worship. And so Israel is not acceptable as Yahweh's children. Look what it says here concerning the father. I made a statement that she's opposite in character of her father. I get that from verse 6. Do you thus repay the Lord for everything He's done for you? And he's about to talk about a little bit about history. Is this the way you repay the Lord with your perverseness, with your crookedness, with your immorality, with your winding ways, walking away from what's moral and right? Is that the way to respond to this God? Do you thus repay the Lord, O foolish and unwise people? Oh, just keep piling it on, Lord. Not only are we perverse and crooked and defective, but now we're also, if we were Israel, foolish and unwise. And I got to sing this song to my kid? I've got to teach this song to my grandchild? That's exactly what you're going to do. Is not He your Father who has brought you, who has bought you? He has made you and established you. A couple more words here just so we know what God is declaring about His chosen children, Israel. Make no mistake, we still believe, because the Bible is very clear on the fact that Israel has a future. Israel remains today, right now, God's chosen people. They're just being disciplined by God. One day they will turn to the Lord and call on the Lord. They will say, blessed is He, not cursed is He, the one who hung on a tree, but blessed is He, Jesus Christ, who came in the name of the Lord. They'll turn to Jesus as their Savior, and He'll come again and save Israel. But in this day, and throughout their history, unfortunately, the bulk of Israel was known as Naval. Worthless, futile, foolish is the word in the English, devoid of wisdom or good sense or sound judgment. Nobody likes to be called a fool. In 1 Samuel chapter 25, there's a story. I just want to tell you this if you want to go chase it down. There's a story about King David and a woman named Abigail who's married to a man named Nabal. Fool. In 1 Samuel it is, 1 Samuel chapter 25, we see a man named Fool. What kind of mother and father named their son Fool? His did. His name was Nabal, and it means foolish one. Fool, someone without wisdom or good sense or sound judgment. And if you read 1 Samuel 25, it's one of those great stories. Women, all the ladies in the church should go and read it this afternoon, because it's one of those great testaments in the Bible to when a man is a fool and a woman saves his life. And Don turns to Melba and says, "Thank you for all those times." He's doing it. I'm not joking. We see the woman Abigail come to the aid of her husband Nabal, because if she wouldn't have intervened for her foolish husband, David would have killed him. And you think, good for David. No, David would have been a fool also. It's a wonderful story. I wish I could tell it. I almost am. Abigail saves the life of her husband Nabal the fool, who God will later kill in the story himself. Abigail also saves the life of King David, because David would have killed Nabal and shed innocent blood. He would have murdered Nabal that day if Abigail wouldn't have interceded. The woman saved not only her husband, but her husband-to-be, King David. The woman Abigail. You want a good name to name a little girl? Abigail. Strong, God-fearing Jewish woman. They're in the book. There are good stories in the book. There's just not that many. Out on this day, God calls Israel devoid of wisdom, devoid of sound judgment, devoid of good sense. You're fools. Teach this song to your kids. And you're unwise. Lo hakam. Lo is the Hebrew word that means without or It's a negative. Hakam means good judgment. So God says, not only do you not have good sense, you don't have good judgment either. You are without hakam, lo hakam. You don't have good judgment. What should your judgment be? I want to relate with that perfect God, that good and great and righteous and upright God. I want to live in His presence forever. I want the words to be obeyed. I want to obey His words. I want to be fruitful. I want to be productive. I want to be blessed by God and prospered by God. And Israel says, nah, don't want that. So what does God call them? You're perverse, you're crooked, you're foolish, and you're unwise. And then He gives them a history lesson. We'll fly through this. Remember the days of old. That's history. Remember who I am. Remember what I've done for you, Israel. So part of the song is history. Remember the days of old. Consider the years of all generations. Ask your father, your biological father. Ask your dad. He'll inform you. Ask your elders and they'll tell you. When the Most High, this is God, El Elyon. If you've ever heard that in a song, El Elyon, that's this phrase right here, this name of God. When the Most High, God Most High, El Elyon, gave the nations their inheritance. Now tell me, what history is He talking about? When the Most High gave the nations their inheritance, when He separated the sons of man. When did the sons of man try to get together? They tried to build something and God had to separate them. What's He talking about? When He separated the sons of man, He set the boundaries after that. He set the boundaries of the peoples, the borders, the boundaries, according to the number of the sons of Israel. What piece of history is He referring to? The Tower of Babel. Tower of Babel. Looks back at the times after the Tower of Babel when Yahweh called out Abraham. In all the confusion and all the chaos, God called out one man, Abraham. And it was through Abraham and his seed, the Jews, that God would bless the entire world. According to the sons of Israel, it says, when God divided the people and set the boundaries according to the number of the sons of Israel. And you say, what does that mean? It simply means that Israel was central to Yahweh's purpose. What was Yahweh's purpose at the Tower of Babel? To stop men from aggressively going against him from coming into the city. He wanted them to disperse and fill the world. And he wanted to save the world through Israel, through the Jew that would one day come named Jesus of Nazareth, Jesus the Christ. So God's main focus is on Israel as He's separating the peoples into nations. Verse 9 says, "For the Lord's portion, Yahweh's inheritance, is His people, Israel." See, that was His focus. He's going to save the world through Israel. Jacob is the allotment of His inheritance. So God called out His people Israel by calling out Abraham from his homeland in Ur of the Chaldees to go to the land of Canaan, the promised land. And this is all part of the song. Remember how this started, Israel. Remember the Tower of Babel, the chaos, and God called us, Israel, to lead the world in worship and to one day bless the whole world through our Son, Jesus Christ. Verse 10 says He found him in a desert land. Now we fast forward to Egypt. He found him in a desert land and in the howling waste of a wilderness. And God encircled him. He cared for His child Israel. He guarded him as the pupil of His eye. A person will automatically guard the pupil of his eye. If anything comes to you, it's probably our fastest reflex to flinch and move your face away when your eye detects something coming at it. Was the central focus in God's eye was the nation Israel. They were the apple of His eye, the pupil of His eye. Literally, the Hebrew means the little man, the Ishon. Ish means man, it's Ishon, it's the little man of God's eyes. In verse 11, continuing the story of what God has done for Israel, like an eagle that stirs up its nest, that hovers over its youngs. He spread His wings and He caught them. He carried them on His pinions. The eagle, I think I've shown you a picture, I know I have before. An eagle, when it tries to teach its young to fly, they won't leave the nest. The eagle has to push the bird out of the nest. So now you have this little awkward baby bird trying to fly, likely going to fail the first couple of times. So what does the eagle do? The mother eagle swoops down with its long pinions and catches the baby birds as they're falling through the sky on His wings. This is a picture of God in His perfect protection of Israel. He pushed you out of the nest of Egypt, and He protected you by what? By the Mosaic law. He gave you the law. He gave you worship. He gave you everything proper to do to live in relationship with the Lord. In verse 12 it says, Yahweh alone guided him. There was no foreign god with him. What does God want Israel to remember in this song? That everything that I've done for you, I did alone. There was no foreign god among you. It was me and the 10 plagues against the gods of Egypt. It was me at the Red Sea that saved. It was me that gave manna when you were hungry. It was me that gave water from the flint rock when you were thirsty. It was me that brought in the quail when you wanted meat. There was no foreign god here. It was me, the great one, the upright one. Why don't you want to have relationship with me? Now Moses tells a bit about the future in verse 13. He made him ride the future of Israel under Joshua in the land. The song has the past, it has the future. He made him ride on the high places of the earth. Look at what God's going to do for Israel. And Israel ate the produce of the field, and He made him suck honey from the rock and oil from the flinty rock. The provision of God, the prosperity of the land, curds of cows and milk of the flock, with fat of lambs and rams, the breed of Bashan, and goats, with the finest of the wheat, and of the blood of grapes you drank wine. They're going to have it all in the land flowing with milk and honey. God's going to prosper them. And what is the response of Israel to God's perfect provision? In the land, when you go in and you realize, my word, this really is a land flowing with milk and honey. How are you going to respond, Israel? But Yeshurun grew fat and kicked. To kick against your owner. I don't want you. Get away. Against the shepherd that's leading you. hard-headed stubbornness. You say, Rick, Yeshurun. What is that? Well, this is an ironic name for Israel that God gives Israel here. It means upright one. Remember what God called Himself? Righteous and upright. What should Israel be? An upright one. Yeshurun. It's sarcastic. It's surely not meant as a fact, because He's called them perverse and crooked, and all the other things He's called them already, foolish and unwise. They are not upright. They will one day be, but they're not now. And so what does Israel, nicknamed by God here, Yeshurun, the upright one, what are they doing? They grew fat. They kicked because of all the provision God gave him. And in verse 16, later it says, then they forsook God who made him and scorned the rock of His salvation. After all God has done for Israel, bringing them out of Egypt, choosing them at the Tower of Babel, carrying them on His wings, on His pinions as an eagle does. After all God's done for Israel, what do they choose to do? When they go into the land and they realize that they're fat and happy and prosperous, and their homes are great, and their fields are great, and their flocks are increasing, when they look at their prosperity, they're going to forget God, they're going to forsake God, they're going to abandon Yahweh, and they're going to scorn the rock of their salvation, God. For they made Him jealous, it says in verse 16. They made Him jealous with strange gods. What's at the heart of all of Israel's problem? Idolatry. God demands to be worshipped alone. Israel rejects that notion. They want to worship who they want to worship. They made Him jealous with strange gods, with abominations. They provoked God to anger. They sacrificed to demons who were not God. Who's behind all the false gods? Satan and his demons. Paul says the same thing in the New Testament. Sacrificing to demons, doctrine of demons. So they sacrificed Israel. In the land of prosperity, they sacrificed to demons who were not God, to gods whom they have not known, new gods who came lately, whom your fathers did not dread. Again, this refers to Yahweh as Israel's father and mother here. In the next verse, it says, you neglected the rock who begot you. That's a birth word. That's a fathering and a mothering. It's a birth word, begot. You neglected the rock who begot you and forgot the God who gave you birth. So God's point to Israel is, how perverse do you have to be to forget what your mother and your father did for you? Now I'm talking about just us. How perverse a person do you have to be to totally neglect everything your mother or father ever did for you? Whether they were a great mom or great dad, you're alive because they fed you and clothed you and gave you shelter. It takes a real crooked, a real dishonest person to look back at his life and say, my mother and father gave me nothing. And that's exactly what Israel is doing. What God is telling them they're doing. You neglected the rock who begot you, and you forgot the God who gave you birth. My goodness, how crooked can you be? How dishonest with yourselves can you be to forget even the birthing mother or the sire in your father that God is? How does Yahweh respond in verse 19? Goes back and forth. It's a brutal song. It really is a brutal piece of work. And they were to teach this to their children and remember, and it would be on their lips forever. What a song. Then the Lord saw this and He spurned them. They're neglecting the rock. They're going to other gods, false gods. They're sacrificing to demons. God sees this and He spurned them because of the provocation of His sons and His daughters. Israel provoked Him to respond. He didn't want to respond this way. God didn't want this relationship with Israel. God wanted them to obey and be blessed. Obey and choose life and be prosperous in the land and prolong your years in the land. God didn't want this. Israel chose this. They spurned Him, or He spurned Israel because they provoked Him, His sons and His daughters. They chose this. Verse 20, and then God said, I will hide my face. That means He's going to take His presence from them. He's going to leave the camp of Israel. Remember the Shekinah glory. God Himself dwelt among Israel. The pillar of cloud by day, the pillar of fire by night. And God says, one day when you do this, I will leave. And He did. He did. You can read it in the book of Ezekiel, where God leaves the temple. He leaves to the east, giving the indication that He'll come back from the east. But He leaves the temple. One day this would occur, and God will leave the temple. He will hide their face from Him. God is not present in Jerusalem right now. I guess, of course, God's omnipresent. He's everywhere at all times. But this Shekinah glory, this dwelling presence, visible dwelling presence of God is not in Jerusalem in the temple right now. There's not even a Jewish temple right now. The Muslims own the piece of real estate, and they have the Dome of the Rock where the Jewish temple once stood. Obvious that God left and has not come back, because Israel provoked Him to this. It says, then He said, I will hide my face from them. I will see what their end shall be, for they are a perverse generation. The second time He used the word. Sons in whom is no faithfulness. How could you forget what your Father has done for you? What does He say? Again, on top of that, they have made me jealous with what is not God. What does He mean? They're worshiping false gods. The pantheon of the nations of Canaan, the Perizzites, the Hittites, the Hivites, the Jebusites, all those people that they were supposed to go in and destroy, they're worshiping their gods. They're not worshiping Yahweh. So what does God say He's going to do? He says, they've provoked me to anger with their idols, so I will make them jealous. Listen to what God says He will do, a future event. I'll make them jealous because I'm jealous, because they're not worshiping me alone, so I'm going to turn the tide on them. I'll make them jealous with those who are not a people, and I'll provoke them to anger the way they've provoked me to anger with a foolish nation. With a foolish nation. Jealous, if you're wondering about this word, we've covered it many times before. It's the Hebrew word kineh, Q-I-N-E, and it means, listen to what it means when God says, I am a jealous God. It means He's desirous of an exclusive relationship. Just me. I alone am God, and I demand all of your worship, all your heart, all your soul, all your mind, all your strength. I alone am God, and I demand exclusive worship. Nobody else but me. That's what it means that He's jealous. God will protect His honor, the honor that belongs to Him only, to be worshiped. Concerning those who are not a people, what does that mean? I'll make them jealous with those who are not a people. I'll provoke them to anger with the foolish nation. It means He's going to bring military conquest upon Israel. He's going to let Israel's enemies defeat them. Look what it says. Remember Deuteronomy chapter 28. God promises Israel, if you will obey, Deuteronomy 28, 1-14, you'll have all these blessings. If you will not obey, I'll bring these cursings on you. So sad. Deuteronomy 28. What does God promise beforehand? The Lord will bring a nation against you from afar, from the end of the earth, as the eagle swoops down, a nation whose language you shall not understand, a nation of fierce countenance who will have no respect for the old, nor show favor to the young. God told them, if you go and hunt idols and worship idols, I will take my protection away from you, Israel, and I'll bring other nations in and they'll destroy you in military battle. That's what He says here in verse 21 of the song. I'll make them jealous with those who are not a people. I'll provoke them to anger with the foolish nation. Verse 22, He says, for a fire is kindled in my anger, This is God speaking about what Israel has done to him. A fire is kindled in my anger and burns to the lowest part of Sheol and consumes the earth with its yield and sets on fire the foundations of the mountains. Let's just say that God is upset with how Israel has turned to idols. So what does he say in verse 23? I will heap misfortunes on them, and I'll use my arrows on them, and they will be wasted by famine. Famine, you think, famine. Where have I read about famine? In Deuteronomy chapter 28, where God says, when you turn from me, these cursings will be upon you. And in Deuteronomy 28:17, he says, cursed shall be your basket and your kneading bowl. That's famine. Your kneading bowl that normally has flour in it, and you're kneading the flour to make bread with it, it's going to be empty because I'm going to bring a famine on the land. You're not going to have food to eat. This is one of the curses. He says they will be wasted by famine, and then he says, and consumed by plague and bitter destruction. Plague. Where have I read that before? In Deuteronomy chapter 28, he warns them of this. He promises them that things will go bad if they turn to idols. Deuteronomy 28:21 says, the Lord will make the pestilence, the plague, to cling to you until he has consumed you from the land where you are entering to possess it. He made these promises. If you turn from me, I will do these things. But if you don't, we'll have a wonderful existence and relationship together. It was Israel's choice. And then the next one, look what it says. All part of the song, what a joyous song. And the teeth of the beasts. Teeth of the beasts. The teeth of the beasts I will send upon them with the venom of crawling things of the dust. Now, I told you that Deuteronomy chapter 28 has the curses of Israel. I also told you another chapter, a chapter in Leviticus. Anybody remember what it was? The 5 cycles of discipline for Israel. When you turn away from me, I'll do this. If you don't return to me, I'll turn up the heat and I'll do this, cycle 2. If you don't return to me, I'll turn up the heat and I'll do this, cycle 3. If you don't return to me, I'll turn up the heat in punishment of you and I'll do this, cycle 4. And if you still don't return to me and worship only me, I'll kick you out of the land. And a nation will come in and dispossess you from my land. It's Leviticus chapter 26. The teeth of the beasts I will send upon them. Well, did you promise that? Or is this just something you pulled out of your hat that we weren't aware was going to happen? No, it was a promise. In Leviticus 26, verse 21, chapter 26, verse 21 and 22, if then, God speaking, if then you act with hostility against me and are unwilling to obey me, I will increase the plague on you 7 times according to your sins. I will let loose among you the beasts of the field. He already promised this. I'll let loose among you the beasts of the field, which will bereave you of your children and destroy your cattle. So not only are these wild animals going to kill your kids, they're also going to eat the animals, so you won't have animals to eat. What's that? Famine. They'll bereave you of your children. They'll destroy your cattle. They'll reduce your number so that your roads lie deserted. And you think, beasts of the field, that must be some sort of poetry. No, I turn you back to the Bible, to the days when King David said, I fought lion with my hands, I fought bears with my hands. Are there lions and bears in the land of Israel? Yes, is the answer. Go look at the story when the boys that were picking on Elisha were consumed by a lion. Bears, I think it was a bear at that point, but lions and bears all throughout the Old Testament. God said, I'll keep these animals in control, but when you disobey me, I'll use these animals against you. Who would want this? Oh my gosh. A couple more and then we stop. In verse 25 he says, outside the sword will bereave. As all of part of the song, because you've turned to false gods, you've kindled my anger, and I'm going to let all these things come upon you, Israel. Outside the sword will bereave, and inside terror, both young man and virgin, the nursling with the man of gray hair. Look what he said in Deuteronomy chapter 28, verse 25. When you disobey me and go into idolatry, the Lord shall cause you to be defeated before your enemies. What does it mean that the sword will bereave? That's the sword. That's the enemy, the military enemy coming on Israel and killing them. The Lord shall cause you to be defeated before your enemies. You'll go out one way against them, but will flee 7 ways before them, and you will be an example of terror to all the kingdoms of the earth. What does he say here? Outside the sword will bereave, and inside terror. That's exactly what he promised them. So God plays fair, make no mistake about it. He doesn't change the rules in the middle of the game. He's already presented all the rules in Deuteronomy chapter 28. Blessings for obedience, cursings for disobedience. And all throughout Israel's history, you can go back to Deuteronomy chapter 28 and Leviticus chapter 26 and say, no, this isn't something new. This is exactly what God said would happen. In verse 26, he said, I would have said, I will cut them to pieces. This is an interesting statement. I would have said, this is God speaking about Israel, I will cut them to pieces. I'll remove the memory of them from men. I'll wipe them off the face of the earth and they'll never be heard from again. God said, I would have done that had I not feared the provocation by the enemy. What does that mean? Why is God afraid of the enemy? What does that mean? This is what the enemy would do, that the adversaries of Israel would misjudge what I've done, that they would say, the enemy armies would say, our hand is triumphant and the Lord has not done this. See, the enemies of Israel would take credit for it. So God said, I won't do it. But I'm going to add one more, and we really do close. I know what time it is. Israel would almost be wiped out completely by Yahweh, except for 2 reasons. You only see one reason here, but I'm going to offer the other obvious reason. Number 1, He would not wipe them out entirely because foreign enemies would say that they defeated Israel, and God wouldn't have it. This is God's choice. Foreign enemies would say they defeated Israel, and He said no. And number 2, Yahweh made promises to Israel, and this to me is the more important of the 2. Yahweh made promises to Israel that He will keep forever. He told Abraham, you and your descendants will own this land forever. Well, how does forever have any value at all, have any meaning if God wipes Israel off the face of the earth? It cannot. So He did not and never will. That's why you have Israel today after Holocaust. On the 28th was International Holocaust Remembrance Day. I don't know if you knew that. I should have sent you an email. When Nazi Germany tried to exterminate the Jews from the land, from the world. 6 million Jews they killed in gas chambers and at gunshot and in a million different ways. And on January the 28th, just a few days ago, was International Holocaust Memorial Day, Remembrance Day. Why do the Jews still exist? When countless people throughout the ages, if you're a history major, a history buff, when countless people, Satan, of course, at the lead, have tried to wipe Israel off the planet. Why does Israel still exist? Because Yahweh made promises to Israel that He will keep forever. That's why. We'll pick up here next time. Father,